Hello everybody, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Reformed GGA, and I'm here to do a 700 round plus update on my Stribog SP9A1 from Grand Power. And by the way, all the guns that I'm going to be showing you guys in this video have already been checked and cleared off screen, so we don't need to worry about that. But the purpose of this video is basically to describe where I see the Stribog fitting in the current market right now. Some of the things they did well, some of the things they didn't do well as revisit some of the things that I've said in previous videos, some of which I found don't really apply, aren't as big of an issue as I thought they were going to be, and other issues that wound up being more of an issue than I thought they would. So it's basically just what have I learned in 700 plus rounds of shooting this particular gun. Now, to begin with, I want to give you guys an idea of where this fits in the current US market. As a lot of you guys probably already know, because this year has been the year of the Stribog. I was planning on getting this well before a lot of the major hype happened. But a lot of people out there are going to already be familiar with the Stribog. And as a lot of you guys know, it's a 9mm gun, and currently it is sold as a pistol, which means that it will never come with a proper stock on it. What you see here is actually a brace. It is not a true stock. This is something that is designed such that you can take this strap apart and you can actually wrap it around your arm, and that's how it is designed to be shot. Now, how you use a brace is not important legally, as long as it's actually designed to be a brace that's supposed to be worn on the arm and those kinds of things, or it's supposed to be sternum rested, those kinds of things. As long as it's not actually designed to be a stock, you can put it on a pistol, is basically the way that the law works. So if you happen to use it as a stock, right now at least, the ATF says that's okay, as long as it was never designed to be a stock. So Grand Power says, okay, we'll sell a bunch of these that we'll put into the pistol category, and then if people want to afterwards put a brace on it, not a stock, but a brace on it, that's up to them. And that's basically what I wound up doing with this thing. I got just the base gun over here, and I added the brace later. I added the little red dot sight up there afterwards. But I start out with just the main frame there, and that's kind of where my little adventure began. And when I initially got the gun, it was, for me, it was something to take in my traveling kit. It was one of my traveling guns, and I wanted something that was fairly small that could do that. On the larger market, though, it's not really marketed as a traveling bedside gun, which is what I use it for, but that's not really how it's marketed, and that's not really anything that anyone talks about with it. They don't say, oh, this gun is so great because it can fit in your suitcase or anything like that. That's particular to me. That's not necessarily particular to other people. When it comes to the broader market, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get into the 9mm subgun-ish role that is out there. There's lots of 9mm guns out there that technically they're semi-auto. They're not true subguns, because true subguns are full auto capable or select fire. But they're subgun-ish. You know, they're not a typical handgun, but they're not as big and clunky as a true rifle would be. And that's kind of the niche that they're trying to fill. And for the longest time, the absolute king of the pile in terms of 9mm subgun-ish guns has been the CZ Scorpion, and I happen to have a CZ Scorpion. Now, this gun is not the normal CZ Scorpion, and not the one that the Stribog is directly competing against. This is the rifle version. It has a huge long barrel out on the front end there. But the normal CZ Scorpion that the other one's competing with has only about an 8-inch barrel instead of a 16-inch barrel. And the Scorpion that's frequently sold that has only that 8-inch barrel on it, of course, doesn't have a stock on the back end. It'll either be open or it'll have a brace on it, because legally for pistols, that's where it starts. If you want to get a proper stock on there, you want to get a vertical grip, all that, there's extra paperwork that you have to fill out, and there's a waiting process they have to go through, and a background check, and a $200 tax stamp, and it's just a pain. So a lot of people forego all of that, and they'll just do a brace instead, and they won't get the vertical foregrip. But I wanted the stock, and I wanted the vertical foregrip, so I wound up with the longer gun. But this is the main 9mm sub gun that is out there on the market right now. And the reason why it's the main one is because it occupies a unique place as far as price is concerned, and a unique place as far as reliability and features are concerned. Right now, the CZ Scorpion will usually wind up costing somewhere between $800 and $1,200 depending on what all you do to it. The base guns are usually pretty close to $800. And then of course you wind up putting something on the back end. If you get it as a pistol, they usually just put a brace on the back end instead of a stock. You can change the barrel links to a certain extent. All kinds of aftermarket goodies that you can do as far as replacing handles and safeties and the magazine release lever and all kinds of things that you can do after it. It's been on the market for a long time, so there's tons of aftermarket support for it. But price-wise, it's not the cheapest subgun, 9mm subgun, at least common civilian legal subgun that's out there. But it's also not the most expensive. Like I said, $800 to $1,200, at least at the time of this video, is not uncommon. Like I said, depending on how much you trick it out. But there are certainly guns that are that much, that are that expensive and more. Talking like the SIG MPX, for example, is a very expensive subgun, and a lot of people just don't have quite that much money. You can get into a CZ Scorpion for about half of what you get into a SIG MPX, depending on the particular models that you're comparing. That's not great. The Chris Vector is another 9mm subgun-ish type gun that is out there, but normally those start at around $1,200 and they only go up from there. So again, not all that great price-wise. And then there's a lot of the MP5 clones that are out there, and again, those can be really expensive guns. Those are like $1,500, sometimes as much as $2,500, depending on the quality of the MP5 clone that you're talking about. Those can be really spendy, especially depending on how much you trick it out, if you want to be able to put a scope on it and all those kinds of things. That really gets us up there. So compared to a lot of those high-end subguns, the CZ Scorpion is considerably cheaper. Now there are, of course, much cheaper subguns that are out there. There is, for example, the Hi-Point 9mm carbine. And one of its problems is that it's a carbine. They don't sell it as a pistol, at least right now they don't. They don't have the short barrel versions with the braces on them, at least not that they're selling in any considerable numbers. So getting that real small package is not something that the Hi-Points do. And the Hi-Points also have some reliability issues, and then on top of that, they also don't look super great. There's nobody who looks at a Hi-Point, well, at least relatively few people who look at a Hi-Point and say, wow, that is a great looking gun. Not really common. There's also the Kel-Tec Sub 2000, which is actually a decent gun, but it doesn't have some of the big boy features that you would expect a true sub gun to have. For example, it doesn't have last round hold open, and that frustrates some people. They like having some of those additional features. And then also the Sub 2000 is not the easiest to take apart and clean. Hi-Point is not the easiest to take apart and clean. Another sub gun that's out there that's pretty common and decent for what it is the Ruger Pc Carbine. It has a pretty good reputation for reliability and accuracy and those kinds of things. But again, it's kind of large because it has a full 16-inch barrel on it, and it's also kind of heavy. And another thing about it is that it's not the easiest in the world to take apart. You actually, there's some screws that you have to take out in order to take the thing apart. And a lot of people do not like guns that you have to take apart with screws because screws can be stripped. I'm one of those people that I do not like screws on my guns, at least for any kind of regular maintenance that I have to do. Screwing in, you know, a sight or something like that, that's okay, that's understandable, but having to unscrew and rescrew parts to get it into the main guts of the gun and clean it, that's just kind of a disaster waiting to happen for me because I strip screws all the time, and so it's pretty much a no-go for me. So there are a lot of guns that are below in the market that just don't have all the features, and you oftentimes can't get them as small, those kinds of things. So yeah, they're cheaper, but to a certain extent you pay for what you get. And then there are other guns that will sometimes shoot more smoothly, like the SIG NPX it's a gas system, and so it shoots a lot better than a lot of other subguns, because a lot of other subguns are blowback, including the CZ Scorpion, it's blowback. And so if you want something that shoots smoother, that doesn't have as hard a recoil impulse, you've got to go up the chain as far as expense, and you go up the chain quite a bit sometimes. The Chris Vector, which also has a different recoiling system, it's kind of a delayed blowback system, which is a little bit better than regular blowback. You pay for that as well. The MP5, which is infamous for having a good recoil impulse because it's a roller delayed system, is also really, really expensive. So the CZ Scorpion has been occupying this middle place where it has a lot of the big boy features, like the last round hold open, and it also comes in pistol versions, not just in rifle versions like I have here. But it does come in the pistol version, so you can get it fairly small and compact. And so it's been this great middle ground. And it is also, unlike a lot of the lower end competitors, has a great reputation for reliability. The CZ Scorpion, of course, started out as a military weapon. It was originally a select fire weapon. And of course, when it came into the American market, it was converted from select fire into semi-auto to make it legal for Americans to own. But a lot of that same basic reliability that was in the military version has come across into the civilian version, and these things have a fantastic reputation for reliability, and I to date have yet to have a single malfunction with this gun, or at least that was due to the gun. There's of course user-induced malfunctions that happen. You know, you short stroke the action and you wound up with a double feed, but that's because you short stroke the action or didn't feed it properly. And then people thinking that something is broken on it just because of how it operates, and not realizing that, oh, it has last round hold open, that's all that happened, etc., etc. There are things like that happen, and I've had a lot of different people shoot this, and if you're not familiar with a gun, it's easy to be confused by the operation of a gun you're not familiar with, especially if you don't normally shoot semi-autos, and a lot of the people that I've shot with recently don't do a whole lot of semi-auto shooting, and so there's some confusion that can happen that way. But as far as malfunctions that are the results of the gun not working like it's supposed to, zero. And there's lots of people who've had CZ's Scorpions longer than I have who eventually do get them to malfunction, but it's very rare. Right now, the normal malfunction rate for a CZ Scorpion is about 1 in 5,000 rounds. And these things will go tens of thousands of rounds before needing any major repairs. And so that's pretty good. Usually for a weapon to be considered militarily viable, you have to have a malfunction rate of 1 in 2,000 rounds or less. Well, this one's about 1 in 5,000 rounds or less, and it's available to civilians, and like I said, it's in that $800 to $1,200 range most of the time. It's not super cheap, but compared to a lot of the other subguns, or subgun-ish guns that are out there, pretty decent. And like I said, for the longest time, this has dominated the market. There's tons of aftermarket support for it because it's been out for so long, and it's occupied that niche that nobody really has been able to touch. And there's been other companies that have come along and they've tried to compete with this, and they haven't done so well. For example, B&T came out with the GHM9, the Grasshopper Mouse 9, and it was supposed to be the Scorpion killer. But B&T made a fatal mistake, which is kind of typical of B&T, and that is that their starting price is basically at the upper end of what CZ Scorpions will be. So they are more expensive than the CZ Scorpion. Now, they do have a little bit better recoil system in them. That is nice. But the cost is higher. And because of that, it's never really been a direct competitor to the CZ. People who don't have quite that much money are not going to pay for it. So the B&T GHM9 was a cool concept, and it's not a bad subgun, but it is not really a direct competitor to the CZ Scorpion just because it's in a different price category. Then there is also guns like the PSA AKV9 that is a much more direct competitor in terms of cost. It'll often cost somewhere in the $700 to $800 to get into one. And so usually about the same cost as a CZ Scorpion, or just a little bit less, so that part is good. And originally when it came out, they did have some reliability issues, but most of that has been figured out by this point. And they also took advantage of the CZ Scorpion market to a certain extent, in that their gun actually uses the exact same magazines, and it can use a lot of the same aftermarket magazines. So you can get magazines with improved feed lips and those kinds of things. But the big problem with that particular gun is that it is made to look like an AK and operates, as far as how you get into the guts of the gun, somewhat similar to an AK, in that there's a top cover that you have to lift up. And that top cover is where you would mount the red dot or optic. And if you have this cover that you're moving up and down to get into the guts of the gun, one thing that can and does happen with it is that you wind up losing zero because of that. And a lot of reviewers that have tested that gun have proven that you do in fact lose zero when you open and you close that top cover. So it's one of those things of, it has a lot of the same features, at least comparable reliability, kind of the same size envelope. It does come in pistol versions, not just rifle versions. In fact, I don't know if they even have a true rifle version of it out yet, but at least the pistol versions. And so there is a lot more direct competition there, but major fail in terms of it not working very well with optics. So the AKV9, even though as far as price is concerned it's a lot more so a direct competitor, it fails in that it does not work very well with optics by comparison. CZ Scorpion plays pretty nice with optics. You don't have to worry about losing zero with your optics on it just because of the way that it's made. AKV9, not so much. Well, there's all this competition that's going on. People are trying to compete with the CZ Scorpion. And for the longest time, the Stribog, our main man here that we're talking about, has kind of been a little bit of a sleeper gun. But this past year, there has been a lot more attention focused on the Stribog. And one of the main reasons why is because it has a lot of the big boy features, like last round hold open and those kinds of things. And it also comes in a pistol variant, not just rifle variants like a lot of the lower end subguns do. Because like I said, the Ruger Pc Carbine is not bad, but it is kind of long because it has a 16-inch barrel on it. The Kel-Tec Sub 2000, when it's folded up, is fairly small, but you open it up, and again, you got that 16-inch barrel that you have to work with. Even the High Point 9mm carbine, same issue. It's a fairly long gun. People like these ones that they can get in the pistol variants that have the shorter barrels on them. A little bit easier to use as a truck gun. Just something that's quick and easy to put somewhere and take with them. A good gun to throw on top of the pile when you're going out to the range, because you can fit it in a little space here and there, and it doesn't really matter. People like those, being able to get a little bit smaller gun that still has a lot of the bigger features. And so this one is one that has really come against the CZ Scorpion as a main competitor. And one of the biggest things about it is that it is less expensive than the CZ Scorpion. Like I said, CZ Scorpion normally runs somewhere from $800 to $1,200, at least at the time of this video, looking at the places online that I've seen. Whereas the Stribog usually runs somewhere between $650 and $800. Now, if you go ahead and you put some kind of a red dot or an optic on it, that's of course going to raise the price a little bit. But even with that, even with most of the add-ons that people would put on them, that usually stays at least under $1,000. So when you do a direct comparison to the CZ Scorpion, to get this one to the same, to do pretty much a same kind of comparison to the same kind of aftermarket features, the Stribog usually winds up being somewhere between $100 and $150 less. So that's actually a really good thing. And again, it has a lot of the same features that the CZ Scorpion does, in terms of having things like last round hold open and those kinds of things. It can take an optic and it doesn't lose zero because you're not opening up a top cover like you are on the AKV9, things like that. It is a much better direct competitor to the CZ Scorpion. But the question is, does it actually beat the CZ Scorpion at its own game? And that one is really going to depend on who you ask, as far as I'm concerned. When it comes to the CZ Scorpion versus other guns, there's a few basic complaints. Okay, as far as price is concerned, the Stribog that I just had up, it meets the price requirements in order to be a CZ Scorpion competitor. It's at the same price or less, and if you're going to compete with something that's established in the market, that's what you need to do. You need to come in at worst the same price tag as your competitors, if not less than them. And then after that, what you start looking at is available features. Okay. Now, looking at the CZ Scorpion, what are the areas of possible improvement? Well, there's a few complaints that people have about CZ Scorpions. One of them that shows up fairly commonly with pretty much everyone who talks about them is that they hate the trigger pull on these guns. A lot of times 8 to 10 pound trigger pull, and for a rifle subgun, that's actually not entirely unusual. There's lots of subguns out there, especially on the more budget end of the market, that actually do have pretty heavy trigger pulls that are kind of spongy and just kind of terrible. That's not entirely uncommon, but like I said, this is an $800 to $1,200 gun. Should I really have to have a heavy kind of spongy trigger pull on something that's that expensive? And granted, there's aftermarket kits that you can get that'll help that out considerably, but as far as the stock configuration is concerned, trigger's not great. Another issue that people have with the CZ Scorpion, and it's one of the issues that I have as well, is that it is not at all a thin gun. And that has to do with how the bolt in this one operates. It is a blowback design, and blowback guns have to have a relatively heavy bolt. And there has to be quite a bit of mass there. And this one has all of its mass on the tail end. And in order to fit all that mass in the gun, they have to really make that frame pretty wide. And just to compare the two, go ahead and put the two side by side here. And you can see that the CZ Scorpion on the bottom is considerably thicker than the Stribog. Okay, it is a thick gun. And then also the main part of the gun, going from where the barrel connects to the main action to the attachment point that is at the back where you put either the stock or the brace or just an end plate, that is also fairly long. That's almost 8 inches in this gun. Okay, so it is kind of a bulky gun. The Stribog, on the other hand, from the point of attachment of the barrel to the end plate, though, that is only like 7 5/8. So it's not a huge improvement, but depending on what space you're trying to fit it into, it is still an improvement, and it is definitely thinner. Okay, so bulkiness is one complaint that people have with the CZ Scorpion. Another complaint that people have with it is ergonomics. A lot of people do not like the handles. They don't like the ambidextrous safety because the offside will dig into your trigger finger when it's off of safe. The magazine release, some people don't really like. They would like it to be more AR style, where you either push into the gun instead of push out, or they want an actual paddle that sticks down past the trigger guard, so it's easier to grab and strip. So ergonomically, a lot of people aren't huge fans of it, and that is something that the Stribog, a lot of people would argue, has improved upon. So not only is it a smaller gun, both in terms of width and also in terms of length, even when you have the same length barrel. If you have, this is about a 7 3/4 inch barrel, and a lot of the CZ Scorpions will also have 7 3/4 inch barrels. I don't have one to show you, I just have the rifle version, but a lot of them have similar length barrels. And these ones and the Stribogs wind up being just a little bit shorter from tip to butt than the Scorpions are. But in terms of ergonomics, So it's a little bit better in terms of size, and in terms of ergonomics, a lot of people like it. This handle style here is a lot closer to the handle style that a lot of people opt for when they do ARs, and in the American market, the AR is a very popular gun. So having a handle style that's close to that is going to work out for a lot of people. Now, I personally do not like that style of handle. I actually like the CZ's ergonomics just fine. I'm good with that. But a lot of people in the American market do not feel the same way. They like AR type controls, and they like it to feel like an AR. So it has a very AR type handle. The safety mechanism is also very AR-like. And while it is ambidextrous, it doesn't flare out nearly as much as the safety on the CZ. So it doesn't tend to be as irritating. Also, the trigger pull on this one is not as heavy, it's not as spongy. It's a little heavy, but we're talking more like 5 to 6 pounds instead of 8 to 10. That's a lot more manageable. And then the magazine release, this one is also ambidextrous, but it does push in like the AR one does instead of pushing out. So a lot of people like that. And the bolt hold open is definitely debatable. It's this little lever up here. It's not great, but at least it's there and it is functional. So ergonomically speaking, a lot of people like the Stribog compared to the CZ, so they did good in that regard. Another complaint that people have with the CZ Scorpion is how heavy the recoil impulse is. The CZ Scorpion has a very conventional blowback design, and so you have a very heavy, chunky bolt that is in there. And the CZ Scorpion does not have much in the way of a buffering system, like whatsoever. And so when this gun fires, the bolt comes back, it hits the back of the receiver, and there's nothing really to dampen the blow, so it just thuds into it. Then the recoil spring brings it forward and it just thuds forward. And it's pretty jarring. It is not an overly pleasant gun to shoot in terms of recoil management. And that's not entirely unusual for a lot of blowback guns. Certainly anything on the lower end of the spectrum that's out there is not going to be that far off. For example, the Kel-Tec Sub 2000 also tends to be pretty jarring when you shoot it. It doesn't have very good recoil management, not much of a buffer system in there. It technically has a buffer, but it's kind of marginal on just exactly if that really qualifies as a true buffer. It's pretty jarring to shoot, and the Sub 2000 is also a pretty light gun, and that doesn't help with the recoil management at all. The Stribog, on the other hand, it is a somewhat light gun, but not nearly as light as the Sub 2000, and it actually does have some recoil buffers in its assembly. In the first couple of videos that I did on it, I showed that it does actually have some buffers in there, and in addition to that, the bolt on the Stribog is considerably heavier than the bolt on the CZ Scorpion, which means that it does not tend to move quite as fast. And you combine that with actually having some buffer pads on the inside, it makes it much more pleasant to shoot. It's not as good as a gas system or even a roller delay system like the MP5, but it is much more pleasant. And so a lot of people do like the recoil impulse on this gun over the CZ Scorpion, so Grand Power did a good job on that one as well. So far, they're actually competing pretty well. Other things that people don't necessarily like about the CZ Scorpion that are places where the Stribog could take off from there. We've already talked about the trigger pull being better. The ergonomics are something that a lot of people like. A lot of people like AR type ergonomics, whereas the CZ is not very AR-like, which I don't mind at all. But a lot of people in the American market, they really like the AR ergonomics. And I've talked about it being kind of a bulky gun, and that's even with the short barrel versions, it's still going to be fairly wide and just a little bit longer than a comparable Stribog. I'm trying to think of other complaints that people have with the CZ Scorpion, and I think that pretty much covers most of them. But does that mean that the Stribog can really outdo a CZ Scorpion? For some people, the things that I mentioned are going to be the make or break. ergonomics, trigger pull, recoil impulse, those kinds of things are everything to them. But there are some areas where the CZ Scorpion definitely beats out the Stribog, and one of them is the sights. Pretty much all of the CZ Scorpions, no matter what variant you get, whether it be the rifle, the pistol versions, the little micro that they came out with, pretty much any variant that is out there are going to have these CZ sights. And these CZ sights are very, very similar to a lot of AR style sights, and they are fully adjustable. The front sight is adjustable for elevation, the rear sight is adjustable for windage, and the rear sight is an aperture style sight, and there are 4 different size apertures that it has. And these sights work really, really great out of the box, and like I said, they're fully adjustable, they hold zero real well. Very, very, very high quality sights that the gun comes with stock. So even if you're not able to afford an optic right away or something like that, you still have very usable sights on the gun that will work for a pretty considerable distance. There's a lot of people who have taken their CZ Scorpions and with the right ammo have been able to get them out to 100 yards relatively easily. I'm not saying that it's the easiest thing in the world. You know, usually they're going to be sitting at a bench or something, resting the gun on something. It's not just, you know, shoulder it and fire it and look, it just naturally goes there. That doesn't really happen with any gun. But you can shoot a CZ Scorpion at 100 yards, right ammo, and from the correct shooting position, but it can be done, and it can even be done with the sights that it comes with. It's not overly hard to do. Like I said, under somewhat ideal conditions, but it's not that hard. The Stribog, on the other hand, the little pop-up sights that it comes with are non-adjustable. Now, when the sights are down, they work like a notch and post sight, and I don't know if you guys can see that. There's a little post up front, little itty-bitty notch in the back, and so you can use them down. And when you use them up, there's a little peephole in the back and a little white dot up front. And, you know, within 25 yards, it's not too far off. That's been in my experience, is within 25 yards, they're pretty much right on, or at least within a couple of inches. But you start extrapolating that to 50 yards out, to 75 yards out, to 100 yards out, there's a really good chance that you're not going to be on target anymore. An 8-inch target for a CZ Scorpion, not the easiest thing in the world, but it's doable with the stock sights that the CZ Scorpion has. But this thing, these stock sights are plastic, kind of chintzy, non-adjustable, and like I said, where they're close enough at 25 yards and in, you get past that and not so much. They become pretty useless past that. And so the sights are definitely nothing to write home about. Another thing that some people really like about the CZ Scorpion, and I'm one of them, is the charging handle. The charging handle can lock back. It's very MP5-like, and there's a lot of people out there, you know, they don't want to pay MP5 prices, but they want to be able to do the lock back, the tactical slap, and the CZ Scorpion allows them to do that. It's not really functionally important all that much, and there are some people that don't like being able to lock the slide back because they're afraid that they're going to confuse things with the bolt release and all kinds of issues. I don't really use the bolt release all that much. I tend to operate everything from the charging handle anyway, and so this works just fine for me. And like I said, I do kind of like that, being able to do the whole MP5 tactical slap thing. It is cool. It's not functionally important, but it is cool. As Nothing Fancy would say, it is a second kind of cool issue. And for some people, that is important. The Stribog, on the other hand, does not do that. There is a little notch back here, but that is just a disassembly notch. That's not something that's used in the functioning of the gun. So when you charge it, it doesn't even actually go all the way down to that point. It stops right before that notch. And so you can't lock back the charging handle on this one like you can the CZ Scorpion. Now, for some people, that's not an issue at all, and functionally it really doesn't mess with the gun not that much. CZ Scorpion's charging handle is non-reciprocating, this one's non-reciprocating. The difference, though, is that the CZ Scorpions, you can actually manually lock it in. This one you can't. You have to use the bolt stop on it. Is that a make or break? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you just want to be able to do that tactical slap and have that cool feature, well then this isn't so fun. Functional, yes, but is it as cool as being able to lock the bolt back with the charging handle? Not quite as cool. That would be a fairly minor issue, but it is still worth pointing out. Another issue with the CZ Scorpion is that the CZ Scorpion actually comes with Sling Points, and they come with Sling Points on either side of the gun. And if you get the rifle version like I did, it'll even have a Sling Point on the stock. On braces, not always the case, but on a proper stock you will have a Sling Point as well. But in the main body of the gun, you'll at least have these rear Sling Points. On a lot of the models that are out there, you'll also have the front Sling Points. Some of them, like Little Micro, you won't have the front Sling Points, but on most of the models out there, you'll have these two Sling Points. If you have one with a stock, you'll have Sling Points in the rear as well. So CZ Scorpion, you have up to 6 different Sling Points that it comes with built into the gun. At least 2, very often 4, and sometimes 6. And for people that plan on traveling anywhere with their gun on foot, slings become really useful and really important. Having to sit there and hold the gun while you're walking around everywhere gets to be a little bit of a pain. And so having slings is really a really good idea. And if you use a sling properly, it can also aid in your functional accuracy as well. The Stribog, by comparison, does not come with any built-in Sling Points. So if you're going to be carrying this thing out in the woods, either you're going to be stuck holding on to it the entire time, and I would argue that ergonomically this is not the best gun to just have at the lower ready holding it all the time. When you're out there and actually shooting it, it's decently ergonomic, but just to sit there and hold in a ready position the whole time, like hours on end, it's not very comfortable at that point. And so you're probably going to want to put some kind of sling mounting options on there, but they're definitely going to be aftermarket options that has some M-lock holes up front. The rear one is not overly useful because there's part of the barrel assembly that sits in the rear M-lock slot, so that's not entirely functional, but the front one is functional and you could put some kind of a sling mount there. The back end, this one I have some pick rail on the back end, and so you might be able to attach something to that. Depending on the brace that you have, you might be able to attach something there. But it's definitely not built in, definitely going to be an aftermarket kind of thing, and kind of a funny looking aftermarket thing. So that is something to consider. Alright, and then another thing that the CZ Scorpion is rather famous for is its sheer reliability. Usually you don't have a malfunction rate any higher than 1 in 5,000 rounds. That is beyond most military expectations. Military expectation is about 1 in 2,000 for malfunction rates. This one's about 1 in 5,000. So it's a really, really, really reliable gun. And aside from user-caused malfunctions, I've not had any problems with the gun itself. Nothing that is actually wrong with the gun. Wrong with some of the users, sometimes wrong with me, but as far as problems with the gun itself, never experienced a single malfunction with this gun. Rock solid. And that's one of the things that people love about it. Okay, a recoil impulse might not be great, the trigger isn't great, the ergonomics might not be great, but the thing runs and runs and runs, and it runs well. And part of that comes from the CZ magazines, and as you can tell, this is only a 20 round magazine, but as you can see, these ones are slightly curved, and slightly curved magazines do tend to work better for 9mm subgun-ish guns than straight magazines do. And this one is also a double feed magazine. It feeds from both left and right. Now these magazines don't have the best reputation in the world because it is a plastic magazine, and so the feed lips on them will crack from time to time. But with most plastic magazines that are out there, eventually, if you run them long enough and hard enough, eventually you'll get the feed lips to crack. Now the aftermarket support has really come in and take care of that problem, and that there's a lot of aftermarket mags available for the Scorpions. A lot of them have reinforced feed lips. So you have a gun that innately is very reliable, and the weak points has been taken care of by the aftermarket arena. So the reliability of CZ Scorpions is pretty high. It's through the roof. Absolutely amazing. The Stribog, on the other hand, how reliable it is really going to depend on who you talk to. There are some of the reviewers that are out there who have gone over the Stribog, and they were actually really impressed with the reliability. I'm not one of them, to be brutally honest. The magazine design is something that I fundamentally don't like. The plastic on the magazine is fairly thin and weak. I don't like that. I have not had any problems with the feed lips actually completely cracking yet, but this magazine actually has developed a little hairline fracture in one of its feed lips. And I haven't had this gun all that long. Look through my video feed and you'll find the first video that I had of this, and that wasn't all that long ago. So it's already developed a hairline crack in one of the magazines, and that's only going to get worse. So I'm not overly impressed with the magazines. The followers that are in these magazines are very, very chintzy. And as you can tell, the spring pretty much goes right up to the follower. The follower has almost no substance to it whatsoever. It's a very chintzy follower. Now, there are things that you can do to help increase the reliability regarding the magazines, and other reviewers have already talked about some of them. For example, Tim from the Military Arms channel talked about lubing the magazines, and that's something that I've done with other guns that I've had before this one that have a very similar operating system. This one has a telescoping bolt, and another gun that I used well before I got to this one also has a telescoping bolt, and that is my CMR30. In a lot of ways, the CMR30 and the Stribog are really good guns to compare. They have a very similar operating system. They're both telescoping bolt designs, blowback designs. They both use plastic magazines, and they both have some of the same weak points, and one of the big ones is the magazine. Now, I would say that the issues with the CMR30 are considerably more profound than in the Stribog, but the same basic problems are still there. And one of the big issues is with plastic magazines, there's always the risk that they're not going to be as reliable as they could be, and putting it in that straight configuration does not help anything. A weak follower does not help anything, and this type of magazine does tend to bind. And so what Tim from the Military Arms channel said about lubing the magazine is a really good idea. On my magazines, I took them apart and sprayed some CLP in there. And then on top of that, something that I learned from the CMR30 is that sometimes the followers will actually, even without the spring and anything else in there, without any ammo, sometimes the followers themselves can bind by themselves in the magazine. Easy way to do that is just take this, the magazine apart, take the follower, drop it in the bottom, and see if it goes to the end naturally by itself. And if you turn it back over, will it fall down naturally by itself? If it doesn't do that, it's going to bind up. And the followers in these magazines did that. So I spent some time sanding them, and one of the big areas that I wound up sanding was the bolt catch that's on the back of the magazine. And the bolt catch on the back of the magazine, there's the main follower, and then the bolt catch sticks out past that a little bit, and that is what operates the bolt catch in the gun that keeps the bolt lock back on the last round. Well, the notch that forms on the back side of that is actually a little bit too tight for the actual frame of the magazine itself, for the body of the magazine. And so I went in there and I actually sanded out that area in addition to everything else. Just took a file and sanded it down. And so the magazines are lubed and they're sanded, and that helps a whole lot with reliability. And a lot of times I do not, and I've mentioned this in previous videos, I don't fully load the magazines. They are magazines that, you know, if you want to, you can jam 32 rounds in there, but they have really weak feed lips by comparison, even compared to the CZ magazines. Just take a look at the thickness of the feed lips by comparison. So CZ magazine, fairly thick feed lips. Stribog magazine, fairly thin. And like I said, CZ magazines, I've had some of these start to crack, but I've also had my CZ Scorpion for quite a bit longer. My Stribog magazines are starting to get some hairline fractures, and I haven't had them that long, so that's not a good sign. But you can get around a lot of the magazine issues by lubricating them and also spending some time sanding the follower and things like that. But even at that, I've still had reliability issues with the Stribog. In that 700 rounds, 700 plus rounds that I talked about, I've had 2 malfunctions. That's not huge. Going back to the CMR30, when I first got the CMR30, I was having malfunctions multiple times a magazine. Okay, out of the box, the CMR30 was honestly a little bit frustrating. Now, after some time, I learned how to do things with the magazine and with the ammunition and all those kinds of things, and I eventually got it worked out pretty good, and I have not had a malfunction out of the CMR30 in thousands of rounds now. But initially, like I said, multiple malfunctions per magazine was not uncommon to start off with. So the Stribog is definitely better in that regard. Only 2 malfunctions in 700 rounds isn't absolutely terrible. And like I said, preemptively, I did a lot of the things with the magazine to make sure that certain things wouldn't happen. Like I said, I loomed it up. I usually don't fully load them just so that I don't put too much pressure on those feed lips. And they're already starting to crack, which is not a good sign. And there's not a whole lot of aftermarket support for these mags. I cannot find ones with reinforced feed lips anywhere, so it's just been the stock factory magazines. That's not so good. And of course, sanding the follower, and especially that catch on the back of it so that it actually moves freely. So a lot of those issues I was able to head off from the get-go just because I was familiar with a lot of the basic operating problems that the CMR30 had. See that this gun is operationally very similar, probably going to have a lot of the same issues, so preemptively able to head a whole lot of that off. But there is still one problem that persists with the Stribog, and it doesn't persist with the CMR30 because the CMR30 came with a warning about this particular problem, and it has to do with the telescoping bolt. Telescoping bolts are great because they allow you to have relatively thin guns, and they're very heavy, so it tends to absorb a lot of recoil. And then because they tend to slow the bolt down quite a bit, it also reduces the amount of blowback and junk that you're going to get in the main action of the gun, so it's not overly hard to clean. I've had times where I fired in excess of 200 rounds through it and open it up to clean it, and it's really not very bad in there at all. And the CMR30 is also like that. It is a rimfire design. It's 22 Magnum, and rimfire is usually very dirty. But because of the telescoping bolts, it's really not that bad for a rimfire. Not bad at all. And the telescoping bolt in the Stribog is very similar in that regard. But because both of the bolts in these guns are so heavy, what it tends to do is it tends to create reliability problems when you have a light ammunition. Now the CMR30 came with a warning in its user manual that said basically don't use anything under 40 grains, which for 22 Magnum is considered a heavier load for 22 Magnum, that is. 22 Magnum loads will be 30 grains, 33 grains, 36 grains a lot of times. And 40 is relatively common as well, but a lot of the lighter loads don't really work very well out of the CMR30, and the user manual tells you right there in the first few pages, don't do it. Bad idea. Well, the Stribog, as far as I saw in its user manual, it didn't warn about problems with light ammunition. I found that out the hard way. With most of my shooting, I use relatively inexpensive ammo just because I do a lot of shooting and I don't want to have to pay through the nose to make it work. And so a lot of the ammunition that I fire is 115 grain ammunition. And with the Stribog, I found that the 115 grain ammunition is not as great as it would be in most other guns. One of the areas is where it comes to accuracy. With light ammunition, 115 grain ammunition, the Stribog will tend to have a little bit of a problem with horizontal stringing. And it's really weird when you look at the target where you have kind of this It's almost like a diameter cut right through the target circle. It's weird, and it really cuts down on your functional accuracy out to range, because most pistol caliber carbines you can get, with a little bit of patience, you can get a 4-inch circle at 50 yards without a whole lot of problems. The Stribog, not always the case. Saying for me, there's other people that would be like half of that, like a 2-inch circle. But the Stribog, because it has that problem with horizontal stringing with the light ammunition, it's usually got about a 50% larger pattern than any of my other pistol caliber carbines or my pistol caliber subguns, whatever you want to call them. It's noticeably worse in terms of accuracy, and has a really weird pattern. Like I said, it's pretty much a horizontal line. There's not much variation vertically, but there's quite a bit of variation horizontally. So that really limits the effective range of the 115 grain loads. About 50 yards is about the max that I want to push it, because if I get too much further out, like 75 yards or 100 yards, some of the rounds are not going to be on paper anymore, just because the horizontal pattern spreads out too much. And granted, I'm not the most accurate person in the world, but depending on the size of the target that you're trying to hit, that you could hit easily with other guns with the same ammunition, becomes a real big issue with this thing. So that was my first indication that 115 grain loads were not all that great in this gun. And then I also had some failure to feed issues. One of the failure to feed issues happened before I broke the magazines apart and got them lubed up and sanded down and those kinds of things. And it was a last round feeding issue. And if you have a magazine that doesn't feed very well, that can happen. And since I've lubed up the magazines and I sanded down the follower, and especially that little notch on the catch on the follower, haven't had a last round issue. So I think that took care of that. But there was also a time when I was firing it when it was in the middle of the magazine and I still had a failure to feed. The previous round had ejected just fine, but the next round had not even come up out of the magazine. And if you're at the end of the magazine, that can indicate that the magazine is binding up, the spring has lost tension. It's usually some kind of a magazine issue at that point. But if it happens in the middle of the magazine, unless you have a magazine that has some real serious binding issues, it's usually not a magazine problem. And that is where I discovered that this gun has a real hard time cycling the light ammunition. If you were holding the gun fairly loosely, and at the time I wasn't shouldering it, if you're holding the gun fairly loosely and it recoils, and you're not pushing back on it, there might not be enough difference between the speed of the frame of the gun and the bolt to actually fully cycle the action. And what will happen is the bolt will only open up about halfway, and that is actually enough to eject the spent casing, but it is not enough to pick up the next round because you're only halfway over the magazine. And so then the bolt comes back and you never chambered the next round. Now, solving that problem is relatively simple. Just pull back on the charging handle and start firing again. It's not overly difficult, but I'd really rather that it not happen. And I've only had that problem with 115 grain ammo with only the light stuff. 124 grain, just fine. Anything heavier, never had an issue with. But the light stuff, especially when it's not being shouldered, when I can't provide a good differential between the speed of the frame and the speed of the bolt, yeah, it does have some issues. Now, is that a big issue? For a lot of people it wouldn't be, because a lot of people would in fact shoulder it, or they would attach it to their arm like a brace is designed to be, something like that. And so the speed of the frame and the speed of the bolt is going to be different. But the fact that it can happen still bothers me. For a lot of people, I don't think that it would be a big issue, but it still bugs me. So what I'm going to do in the future is I'm actually just going to switch out to 124 grain practice ammunition. I've found some decent sales online that are within my budget for practice ammo, And so that's just what I'm going to go with. And the accuracy with the 124 grain ammo is a lot better. You get rid of a lot of that vertical, sorry, not vertical, but horizontal stringing problem as well. So it is a problem. It's not as reliable as the Scorpion, in that the Scorpion can take any weight of ammo. It really can. Pretty much anything that they make for 9mm, the CZ Scorpion can fire just fine. And I've put all kinds of things through it, and I've seen people put all kinds of things through it. Everything from like 65 grainers to 168 grainers out of the CZ Scorpion don't seem to be any kind of a major problem for it. And part of the issue with it is that its ejection cycle is a little bit different. In order for it to eject, the bolt has to be almost that far back. It's pretty far back on it. It's not very far from the distance of, that it has to go back in order to pick up the next round. So if it's going to function, it's going to function. There's no halfway, there's no in-between with it. You have to go pretty far back in the chassis in order to get that spent case out of there. And so if it's going to eject, it's almost always going to pick up the next round as well. The Stribog, on the other hand, it'll eject when the port is only halfway open, when the ejection port is only halfway open. And so it can fire a lot of rounds that it cannot cycle fully. And so that's a little bit of an issue. So it really likes the heavy stuff, and the problem with the heavy stuff is that it's a lot more expensive to practice with. 115 grain ammo compared to 124 grain ammo oftentimes will have somewhere between a 10 to 25% cost difference. And for some people, that's enough to say that this thing isn't really so fun anymore. A lot of times people get these as plinking guns, as recreational guns. That's one of the great things about 9mm, is that it is one of, if not the cheapest, centerfire cartridges that are out there. But if I have to use a more expensive type to plink with, well, that's not so great anymore. And that is what the Stribog seems to require if you want to get 100% function out of it. It likes heavy ammunition, and then the magazines, like I said, are problematic, just like the CMR30 magazines are problematic. Not to the same degree. I'm talking about 2 malfunctions out of 700 plus rounds versus multiple malfunctions per magazine with the CMR30. So it's not on the same level. It's orders of magnitude different, but it's still the same kinds of problems that have the same fundamental root cause. Hey, like I said, the bead lips on this one have already started to crack. There's little hairline fractures in this one on the right-hand side, my right-hand side. And in order to get this to function like I wanted it to function, it had to be lubed, and the follower had to be sanded down. And especially, like I said, that little catch on the back of it where it meets the rest of the follower, that little notch in there had to be sanded down pretty excessively, I would say. Much more than I would want to with a brand new gun. So, in the net result, where does the Stribog sit in the market? Is it a good competitor for the CZ Scorpion? And it's going to depend on your gun and what your preferences are, as far as I'm concerned. For me, I honestly like the CZ Scorpion better. Yes, the CZ Scorpion does have those plastic mags that still have the problem with the feed lips. But like I said, there are aftermarket magazines out there that have reinforced feed lips, so that's not that big of an issue. The reliability is way, way good on the CZ Scorpion. And it does have a lot of features that the Stribog simply doesn't have. The sights that it comes with are pretty awesome sights. It has mounting points for slings. It's out of the box, basically ready to go. Yeah, you'll probably still want to put an optic on it and things like that. But what you get out of the box is more. Now, is it the $100 to $150 difference more? Well, you're going to have to decide for yourself whether or not it's worth it. But better reliability, sling points, as well as fully adjustable open sights. That's hard to beat. Yeah, I still think that the CZ Scorpion is going to be dominating the American subgun-ish gun category for some time to come. And in addition, given that you just have so much aftermarket availability for the Scorpion and so many different variants that are available for it out there, I think it's still going to be at the top. But if Grand Power could get some of the issues worked out with the Stribog that it has, that would go a long way to closing the gap between the two. They've already got the biggest issue figured out, which is coming up with a gun to compete with the Scorpion that is actually cheaper than the Scorpion. They got that figured out. And while I don't like the sights that it comes with, and while I don't like the fact that it doesn't come with sling mounting points built into the gun, I can live with that. What I'd really like to see them spend time on is reliability. Get some magazines with reinforced feed lips that I don't have to oil and sand down. That'd be really great. And then make the gun so that it functions with the light, cheap ammo. Okay, 115 grain ammunition, especially in America, is not uncommon at all, and the gun should run with it. And like I said, 2 malfunctions out of 700 plus rounds is not terrible. But when your competition can go literally 5,000 rounds without a single malfunction, that is not good. That is not good at all. You're not really competing at that point. There's a lot of things that the Stribog has going for it that are good. It is a much more svelte design. The ergonomics are much more AR-like, so a lot of people in the American market are going to like it. I personally am not a huge fan of the AR controls, but they're not bad. They're very functional, and for most Americans, it's what we're used to. It's what we like. Lots of good things going on there, but the reliability issues are the thing that I think is going to wind up plaguing the Stribog for some time. Until either they or the aftermarket figures out what to do with the magazines, that's always going to be an issue. And the fact that it does not like the light ammunition is also going to be a bit of an issue. When I shoot the gun at a target, I don't want there to be this little horizontal line through the target. I want a little circle in the middle of the target, not a line. Okay, the horizontal line might be very interesting to look at, but it's not what I want. Okay, I want to be able to use cheap plinking ammunition and actually get something that looks like a group and not like a line. And like I said, the reliability is not terrible, but I happen to be in a position where I'm using this for self-defense purposes. This is my traveling bedside gun. And the reason why is because this is the only gun that I have that fits inside of the case that I put inside of my suitcase. That at least is something that is of this form factor. Handguns, of course, will work as well, but handguns don't typically wind up being as quick into action or as accurate as these are. And even though this one is not all that accurate with 115 grain ammo, it is still more accurate than I am with most handguns, so it's still better in that regard. But the fact that I've had 2 malfunctions in 700 rounds does still kind of sit in the back of my mind. And I know that those malfunctions were only on times when I did not have the back end of the gun braced on something. Okay, it's when I was firing like this, you know, and actually technically I was bump firing it, and so there's, yeah, not a lot of control on the back end at all. So it's kind of extreme conditions, so I'm not overly worried about it. But it's still going to be in the back of my mind, and it makes me just less confident with the gun than I could be otherwise. I like it. I think it has lots of potential, but I don't think it's quite there yet. There's so many good things about it, and like I said, lots that could be forgiven. Okay, so the sights that it comes with are kind of chintzy. That's not a huge issue because a lot of people wind up putting some kind of an optic on it anyway. I can live with that. It doesn't have sling points, which is annoying. But depending on how you intend to use it, if you tend to use it for home defense as a bedside gun, well, it doesn't necessarily need a sling for that. It can be useful, but it doesn't really need one for that kind of purpose. Unless you're actually planning on going somewhere and trekking with it for miles. Not really a super big thing. I would definitely like that they put it on there, but not a super big thing. But the reliability issues with the magazine, the fact that these lips on it are already cracking, and then just the fact that it does not like light ammunition, those are issues that are definitely worthwhile looking at. Fix the magazine, fix the fact that it does not like light ammunition, and you've got yourself something that I think can compete with the CZ Scorpion all day long. because the recoil impulse on this thing is much better. The overall size and form factor is much better. The ergonomics, lots of people like the AR style controls. All of that really, really makes this gun great. And every time that I've taken this gun out and put it in different people's hands, they wind up falling in love with it, and they want to keep shooting it and keep shooting it and keep shooting it. And that is a great sign until it malfunctions. Okay, that will kill people's buzz, as it were, faster than anything else when it comes to a gun. People like guns when they work, and people like guns when they can hit something with it. And this one, with its horizontal screening problem with light ammunition, doesn't help. And then, like I said, not many, but there have been a couple of malfunctions with the gun as well. And that does cause people to kind of sit there and go, don't know if I like it so much anymore. Okay. For the people who have run it, who've never had malfunction with it, and I brought the targets in close enough that the horizontal stringing issue wasn't going to be a big deal, absolutely love the thing. Push the targets out there a little bit further, firing the light ammunition, and if they happen to do bump fire or something that doesn't have good control of the back end so that the bolt is really forced to move separately from the frame, then they don't like it so much. Okay. More so than the sighting options and the sling point options and things like that, that's going to be the big killer. The Stribog has a lot of potential, but until they fix the magazines, or someone in the aftermarket comes up with a fix for the magazines, and until they fix the reliability issues with light ammunition, the 150 grain ammunition, I don't see it taking off, at least as much as it could. Now, I know there's lots of people out there that have already bought them, that like them, all that. That is great, but I don't think it's going to be a CZ squirt bin killer in its current configuration. Who knows what the future will hold, though? This is already an outdated version of the Stribog. Who knows what the future versions will be able to do? Maybe they will be better. Maybe the magazine issues will become a thing of the past. Maybe the issues with the light ammunition having that horizontal stringing effect and not being able to fully cycle the action, maybe that'll be a thing of the past. I don't know. But right now, those are my concerns. And there are other things that I mentioned, but those are really my big ones. Make sure the magazine works right, and make sure that it can take a wide variety of ammunition weights. You fix those two things, and you've got a gun that can compete with the CZ Scorpion all day long. Right now, you basically pay for what you get. It is less expensive than the CZ Scorpion, and that's because it's less reliable than the CZ Scorpion at the end of the day. And it also has a few less features. It doesn't have fully adjustable open sights, doesn't have sling mounts, those kinds of things, but reliability is always going to be number one. And some of the people out there have loved their Stribogs and never had a reliability issue with it. If that's your experience, great. But mine is 2 malfunctions and 700 rounds, and I have already got hairline fractures in my magazines. So for me, not so great. If you guys got through the entire video, thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you guys have a good one out there. Do lots of shooting and have some fun.